Good morning. We're live this morning, Tuesday morning, 10:30 a.m. And I am live with Frieda Millhouse-Jones. She's a mom and a doctor who's going to share her family story with eating disorder, parenting a teen with eating disorder. Before we get to her story, and thank you for joining us, Frieda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we get to her story, though, I want to remind you that we're live on Tuesday. If you are watching us any other day, any other time, not 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, then you are watching a replay. Frieda will be here to address your comments and questions if you're live, but if you're not live, she won't be here. But please feel free to dialogue with other people in the comment section. We love to hear from you and see that action. Now, some of you may think that Frieda's name sounds familiar, and it should because she wrote an article for us a few months ago that just did really well. And I say went viral, but if you ask my team, my numbers don't indicate viral. But I don't agree with him. I disagree. It went viral. So we asked her to join us live and share her story so that you could hear from her directly. Thank you for joining us, Frieda. I really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Okay, why don't we start with tell us just a little bit about yourself, your family, and the work that you do.
Well, I am actually a practicing internist here in Atlanta, primarily in outpatient internal medicine. I'm married to a wonderful husband, Terrence, and have two girls. And I guess as far as other things about myself, I enjoy yoga. That's kind of how I keep myself sane. I love to read and I love to dance. And so these are a few things about me.
Oh, those are good things.
Dance minor in college, but the medical school thing kind of took the forefront. So I had to put dance in the back seat for a while.
That's a whole different conversation, how you pursue your passions and your vocation, and they can be completely different.
Correct.
That's a future conversation. But for now, we're talking about eating disorders. So can you tell us what is an eating disorder?
Well, eating disorders are complex. They oftentimes start with just patterns of disordered eating. So, and there are restrictive patterns or patterns where patients or individuals may overeat. It often can start as a method to regulate emotions, but then based on other factors, be it genetics or environment, it can then spiral into a full-fledged disorder, which it can look any one of a number of ways. We're probably most used to seeing disorders such as anorexia nervosa, which is a disorder where patients are usually underweight and sometimes severely underweight. There are disorders such as bulimia, where patients may binge eat, so eating large amounts or more than what a traditional person may eat within a certain amount of time. And then it's usually followed by some type of purging, be it vomiting, laxatives, or excessive exercise. So there's a need once the patient binge eats to then cancel out the binge in some form. And then I guess these are the three most common ones. Binge eating disorder is actually extremely common, where patients binge eat and they may have multiple episodes of binge eating per week, but they do not purge. And so that's another entity. And there's some other subtypes, but our experience primarily involves anorexia with a little bit of bulimia, actually.
Okay. Jessica, our wonderful Jessica, who's behind the scenes, is going to put up some articles and pieces that tell about eating disorder symptoms and different types. So you can peruse those at your convenience. For now, we're going to go straight into the Jones family story. And first, I want to thank your daughters and your husband for allowing you to share your story with us. Thank you very much, your whole family. And why don't you tell us your story with eating disorder in your family?
Yes. I kind of want to piggyback on that because I really had a long conversation with my daughter prior to doing this live broadcast and just asking what kind of things are off limits. And I asked her several times and she said to me, Mom, they're just I really can't think of anything, you know. This is my story and it's made me who I am. And I have nothing to be ashamed of. And there are a lot of people out there that are hurting. So she was also enthusiastic for me to share her story or our story so that we may help other people. So I think that I'll start back in, my daughter is now in high school,
Mhm,
but our difficulty started in middle school. And I remember I would always like hear stories from parents in the exam rooms about any one of a number of different tumultuous conditions at home or
mhm,
distressing mental health conditions. And I kept thinking, wow, I hope that doesn't happen to us.
mhm,
Um, and then lo and behold, um, around seventh grade, my daughter started having some very dark thoughts. And she came to me with those thoughts. And being the healthcare professional that I am, I took them very seriously. And so we started with psychotherapy, then got referred to a psychiatrist. We were placed on medications and just never quite seemed to make headway. We would start new medicines and she would say, oh, this is making me worse. It's making me suicidal. So then we would change medications. And it was just this nonstop, like, merry-go-round, it seemed like, until things finally spiraled out of control. And
mhm,
we ended up having um, a partial hospital program admission. Things got a little bit better. We established care with a psychotherapist that she's still currently with. But there was always, over the years, going into early high school, there was just always this sense that we were missing something.
mhm,
We were very compliant with all of the individual therapy groups, like classes that she would attend. Um,
mhm,
she had her psychiatrist. We were extraordinary compliant, but things just never seemed to progress. And then, um, you know, God has jokes sometimes because I have a colleague that is actually an internist that will be seeing patients primarily. She's leaving traditional private practice to start a primarily eating disorder practice. And she had set up a panel interview of different dietitians and therapists and psychiatrists to teach our practice about treatment of eating disorders and just how it presents, et cetera, et cetera.
mhm,
And so I really didn't. It was raining that day. I really did not feel like going. I'd already RSVP'd yes, and I was like, "Oh, I can't let her down. She's worked so hard in order to put this together." So I went, and I remember thinking, listening to all this. There was one African American psychotherapist, and I remember raising my hand and saying, yeah, we really just don't see this that much in my primarily African American patient base. And
mhm,
she promptly corrected me like, "Oh, no, we don't there's plenty of disordered eating or eating disorders in African Americans." Um, and she was like, "I may see more binge eating disorder, but we still see anorexia, bulimia, and the other disorders." And I remember thinking like, "Hmm, I mean, I've been in practice for a while. I really just don't see that." And I kind of like listened, but like, yeah, whatever. Uh,
mhm,
and then lo and behold, my daughter ended up having a syncopal episode or passing out episode at home. And when that happened, it was like ding, 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 ding. Remembered the panel that I had just attended like several months prior. And I asked her, like, have you been vomiting? And she was like, yes. And she had admitted it. And I was just floored. I was like, how have I been missing this all of this time?
mhm,
Um, and so we then kind of made the transition to recognizing and digging a little bit deeper that it wasn't just vomiting. I could then look back at other signs that we missed, such as, start wearing baggy clothes. Uh, she would make excuses as to why she couldn't come down to eat for dinner. Like, it's like, hey, come down to eat. Oh, I'm working on some homework. I'll eat later. Uh, there were things that all of a sudden that I knew that she used to love, and her dietitian calls this terminal pickiness, where it was just like, I don't like that anymore. I don't like that anymore. Just kind of like pick, 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 pick until there was
Mhm.
like hardly anything left that she would eat. And we would see that she would eat at times, like, so she'd get up and make like a ton of pancakes. And we just thought that, oh, wow, she's just kind of a carbaholic. She just loves to eat carbs. But what would happen is that when patients restrict for a while, they're actually they become very hungry, and they're usually craving glucose, carbohydrates for energy. So we would see times when she would eat and then just kind of not just again based on my own implicit bias that I'd heard that, oh, Black people don't get eating disorders, or that's just like rich, affluent Caucasian women that get that. And I just ignored a ton of signs and symptoms. And so, another just adding on another thing is that we would, like, sometimes go to Chick-fil-A, let's say, and she would get, like, a Chick-fil-A sandwich or what have you, but come to find out, there are all of these internal food rules that she had. So, I can eat if it was right before dance class, where then I could, like, exercise and negate, um, the calories.
Mhm.
So, all of these things started, coming together and realizing, okay, this is truly an eating disorder. Um, Interestingly, one of the criteria uh, that used to be, I think, part of the psychiatric conditions that you had to meet for anorexia was losing your menses. But she never,
Mhm.
she started menarche. She had her cycles, and so again, the doctor in me is like, well, she's having periods. She's, hasn't fallen off the growth curve. Like, how could this be? Okay, so fast forward, we finally realized that this is a problem and it's a pandemic. And
Mm.
oh my goodness, I'm sure that many of you have seen the amount of eating disorder hospitalizations, the amount of eating disorders that have surfaced out of the pandemic, just been extraordinary. So I spent so much time trying to call and find an eating disorder therapist that could take her on, and we were placed on multiple wait lists. And in that time, she just spiraled, spiraled, spiraled. We then had to be admitted for an acute hospitalization. And from that, we were able to get into another partial hospitalization program to start eating disorder treatment. And that has been a lifesaver. It's literally saved my daughter's life.
We're so happy she's in that program. What happens in the program? What do they do for parents who may be seeking this type of help?
Mhm. Yeah, so, in anorexia in particular, the medicine, the treatment is food. And
Mhm.
so there is a lot of structured meals, both like breakfast, morning snack, I'm sorry, lunch, afternoon snack, dinner. And in the program, you're usually responsible for managing the family kind of manages one of those meals, and then they go into the treatment from, let's say, 11 to 7.
Mhm.
Have lunch there and snacks there, and it's supervised. They're with their peers that are in treatment, and
Mhm.
it's usually, at least for my child, it was a very nurturing, supportive environment. The other clients, at the time that she was there were a lot of young girls, and they just coach each other on and give each other hugs whenever they, complete a meal or even halfway complete a meal, because there's such uh, for anorexia in particular. I mean, they're usually restricting enough so that they're underweight. There is an intense fear of gaining weight, and usually some body kind of perception issues. So when you've gone for a very long time where you haven't eaten, or people that don't understand eating disorders will say, why don't they just eat? Well, the body has literally um, tried to conserve energy. So it's really just trying to protect the brain and like the heart and other things. So the gut actually gets very sluggish and lazy. There's like from chronic malnutrition. So there's a condition called gastroparesis that can happen where the stomach is just hasn't been used to working very well. So um, you have to slowly eat a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And they'll really actually feel very, very bad, nauseated, sick when they first start re-eating. But you just have to keep pushing through the discomfort in a
It's like
very, go ahead.
no, I'm thinking it's like rebuilding a muscle, right? If you haven't
Mhm.
used a muscle. Yes.
Correct, correct. So, the first meal, you might be able to only eat half of it, and then you have to supplement that with some type of oral supplement like a boost drink or what have you, until finally, once the body starts to get weight restored, the intestines can start to work again. And all of a sudden, a lot of patients with anorexia, they'll complain of constipation and things of that nature. And then all of a sudden, oh, now finally they can, because everything's working again, it's used to digesting food and moving. Now they can have bowel movements and all of those things. So it's extraordinary what this does to the body and the mind.
Now, eating disorders, I read, they develop often in adolescence or young adulthood, although they can develop during other times. Do we know why so many people develop these disordered eatings during this time period, this adolescent period?
Gosh, I was talking with a psychiatrist yesterday, and there are just so many factors.
Mhm.
Um, there's actually some research that there may be some genes that predispose patients to eating disorders because you'll look in clusters of families and
Mhm.
see that there may be other family members that suffered from an eating disorder. Um, the environment is very important.
Mhm.
So if there is a very I don't know, like in different families, there's just lots of different issues that can occur.
Mhm.
And so for a person where restricting calories works to decrease their anxiety and help them feel like they're more in control when things are out of control, if they're the kind of person where that clicks and that works, then it's very easy for that to just kind of go into this loop. I guess I just
Mhm.
kind of like a neural loop
Mhm.
where that just continues to spiral. So, and then this pandemic has been an entirely uh, it's been enormous stress and traumatic for many people. So they had access to food, and then that can kind of spiral.
So there's a connection between anxiety and an eating disorder. And you mentioned that you were treating your daughter first for, was it anxiety issues that you were treating before you discovered the eating disorder
And depression,
and
uh,
depression?
anxiety and depression. And so, one of the things I want to highlight in our case is that we were chasing the anxiety and depression, and mostly depression at the time in
Mhm.
middle school. And she was not improving. And the reason that she was not improving is that there was this underlying eating disorder. And
Mhm.
so the brain needs food. There's an entity in anorexia called starved brain,
Mhm.
which if you can think of like an animal, like a dog, like that's starving on the street, how they can like, they can be aggressive and irritable and hyper vigilant. Um, that's literally kind of how a starved brain, the person with starved brain anorexia feels. They're like very
Mhm.
they can be very moody, they can be very irritable, they can be very rigid in their thinking.
Mhm.
There is a book that I read, like I'm gonna go, I have it right here called Sick Enough by Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani,
Mhm.
which was so helpful to me because um, the I think in this book she commented that there was a study where they looked at maybe healthy young men and gave them these higher calorie diets, like up to 3,000 calories a day, um, in the second half of the study, reduced their caloric intake and made them do a lot of heavy labor. And what they found in many of these otherwise normal subjects is that they became very depressed. Some of them started to self-harm. Uh,
Mhm.
there was just, it just really highlights how important it is for the brain to have like nutrition because it just does not work correctly
Mhm.
when it's starving and they won't. So for my child in particular, I, she had her mood disorders that are independent of themselves, but they were chronically like that. She could not recover and get better because this eating disorder was um, in the background. And now that she has been nutritionally rehabilitated, her brain is working normally. We've got like our girl back, like our wonderful girl. It's just so beautiful to watch. She's extraordinary.
That's an important note for people to remember that when you're dealing with an eating disorder, you can starve the brain, which is going to change the person's personality.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
all of these things come into play. And if this is happening into your home in your home, hold on because there is hope. We have a lot of resources here. Dr. Jones has shared some. She's going to share some more. I have a question about your family. You say we because this is the whole family, but how did it affect you? I have another daughter,
mhm.
and there's you and your husband. How did it affect your whole family?
Wow. Well, the second part of this is that we did, we had organized our partial hospital treatment
Mhm,
for her eating disorder initially, but the mainstay or the modality that's been shown to be the most helpful for adolescents for treating eating disorders is called family-based therapy,
mhm,
also known as the Maudsley approach, which I
mhm,
was reading started from the name came from the developers that were at a hospital called Maudsley Hospital in England. So there are basically three phases to family-based therapy or what's called FBT. So we
mhm,
think of it as there's like the toddler phase or baby phase where um, it's like, hey, you are the parent, you know how to feed your child. You basically take over all the meals. So
mhm,
and have a schedule like it's breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, dinner, bedtime snack. Um, there's meetings like with a therapist for the entire family because eating disorders are a the entire family has to be involved for the success of the patient.
mhm,
And so, or my daughter in this case. So we had to learn how to coach her at the dinner table, my husband, myself, uh, my other daughter just kind of learned to, she's younger, so she just kind of learned to be in the mix and be
mhm,
respectful. There are games that you play at the dinner table to reduce the anxiety around eating meals.
mhm.
It encompasses the entire family. And in order to um, be successful, everybody has to be all in. And
Okay.
it was extraordinarily stressful. Not only that, but just like making sure that you have to cook and prepare and eat or watch her eat and supervise and coach and sometimes fight. I mean, literally, we would like kind of go toe to toe, like, you've got to eat this. And she would be very, very resistant. Um, so, in that, it's taught me a lot about myself. It's
Mhm.
in order to make it through, it's made my relationship with my husband stronger. And we've had to be in so much family therapy that I think as a unit, we just work so much better together because we've had to in order to
Mhm.
help save her life.
And how's she doing now?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just amazing. I am just so extraordinarily proud of her. So, as I mentioned in the three phases of FBT, the first phase is the toddler phase where you basically take over all the meals. The second phase, they um, liken it to an adolescent phase where they take over some of their choices of meals, but
Mhm,
you still have meals that you supervise or I don't want to say administer, but you're still have partial control over the meals. And then the third phase is like the adult phase where they uh, take over their eating
Mhm.
independently on their own. So she's in the third phase now. So she's just doing what she needs to do. And, um, we still see our dietitian monthly and making sure that she's stable. And she's just doing great. So extremely proud of her.
And will this be a lifelong struggle for her, or is there an endpoint, or
Well, from what I understand, recovery is usually about full recovery is like 5 to 7 years.
Mhm.
So I think after that time period, then you're pretty much in the clear. But up until then, we'll still be just following whatever the plans are for our therapist, kind of the guidelines that they set
Mhm.
forth, and her dietitian as well. So it's a long road. Obviously, it's when it works for that person to help relieve their anxiety or stress or depression or make them feel more in control, it's like an old friend. So as disordered as it is, it's easy to kind of go back to it when times are rough. And so I won't say that we're in the clear, but we are all working together to make sure that we keep moving in the right direction.
Okay. So when you started your story, I want to say Dee Walker says hi, everybody, and we say hi. And I'm
Right.
pointing that out because if you have a comment or a question, please put it in the comment section so that we can address that, especially directly to Frida. She was happy to address that. The beginning of your story, you said that you realized your daughter had an eating disorder when she passed out.
Mhm.
What advice do you give to parents who either suspect that this is an issue or, like you, are confronted with it in an extreme circumstance like that? What is the next step?
First, I would say for anyone that just don't assume, always ask, get
Mhm,
nosy, ask questions to your child. If you start to see things that you're just questioning even a little bit, you
mhm,
know, um, take it seriously. A lot of people they don't take eating disorder seriously, and
mhm,
it needs professional help in order to get past it correctly and healthily. So you can first start with reaching out to your pediatrician. You can meet with a psychiatrist if you know that there's other mental health disorders that you've already are concerned about, both depressive symptoms, or anxiety related symptoms. But the most important thing is to reach out and get help.
okay, okay. Um, what else do we need to know, um, so that we can support our teams through the process? You've, as you say, you still have a ways to go, but you've come through some critical parts of this process. What do we need to know so that we can best support our teams?
What do you need to know in regards to which? I mean, there's so much to.
Let's say that our teen is in the beginning of of recovery. How can we best support them?
I would just say just to be loving and open and
Mhm,
understanding. Um, you know, there's no one path to recovery. It's like a
mhm,
zigzag line. Very
mhm,
commonly, and I think the biggest thing is just to be like just to show up, just to
mhm,
show up for your child and to be there to let them know that they're not alone, that you're
mhm,
gonna be there with them the entire step of the way, and that you're not gonna always get things right, and
mhm.
that you're learning and you're doing the best that you can, and we're in treatment so that we can do better. And so, that's really it. I've learned it's very interesting, and the thing that, I also want to impress upon everyone is that here I am an internal medicine physician, like, this is supposed to be my jam, right?
Mhm,
Healthcare, health-related problems are supposed to be my jam, and yet, I did not see this in my own home.
mhm,
Like,
mhm,
I rationalized away a ton of symptoms and signs because of my own implicit bias and just general miseducation about, eating disorders. So, they are a very secretive disease, and if a patient, person, child wants to hide it from you, they will do a really good job. So your job is to get in there, ask questions, and then follow the guidance of the people that are trained to treat this disorder. I mean, there are eating disorder. I mentioned pediatricians and psychiatrists, and that is one part, but probably the most important part of eating disorder care is the eating disorder therapist. And you will meet with them weekly, and they will uncover tons and tons of stuff that you probably did not realize was even an issue. Uh,
Mhm.
and you just follow their lead, and they will lead you on the path of recovery. And the dietitian is also important too. Gosh, there's so many people on the team. It's like it's usually there's a psychiatrist, an eating disorder therapist, a dietitian, um, psychiatry, and then you have just your general medical um, person, like either your
Mhm.
pediatrician or an internal medicine physician. It's a team approach.
The team approach. You mentioned that the pandemic has, of course, made this worse. A lot of mental health issues worse, which also makes care more difficult to achieve. You gave us a resource. It's in the comment section, I believe. I watch this stuff scroll up as I'm looking for people's individual comments and questions about an online resource for this, that somebody is going into online care.
Yeah, so there's one that's already in existence. Equip is like a large
Okay.
um, telemedicine virtual practice for eating disorders that I think
Okay.
are credentialed on a lot of insurance companies. My colleague is leaving to go into um, eating disorder treatment in the Southeast. Her name is Dr. Kara Pepper. So I believe that she's now licensed in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, probably somewhere else. So they're, I don't remember off the top of
Yeah.
my head. Um, Dr. Carolyn Ross does also a lot of eating disorder treatment. There's tons and tons of uh, there's lots of ways to access care. Unfortunately, I think one of the biggest barriers, though, are just it's insurance. Insurance and just it's extraordinarily expensive. But many of the therapists and dietitians they don't bill your insurance on their own, so you have to pay and then submit the claim to your insurance company yourself. And um, so luckily there is one, I think, nonprofit that I sent called Project Heal that does have some scholarships and things of that nature for people to access eating disorder care. But that in and of itself is one of the biggest challenges. I think of all of the young people that are out there whose parents are working and just trying to make ends meet. And I think of the cost that we've had to incur for her care. And I know for many families, it's just not feasible. And so that's one of the things that needs to change in this country.
Thank you for pointing out the resources. We have the links in the comment section, and
Mhm,
also the additional difficulty of the cost. And hopefully
mhm,
online services will help alleviate some of that. You mentioned, we know that any mom, any parent, when they realize that something has gone undetected in their home, feels guilty and awful.
mhm,
And
mhm,
you are also a physician. So you
mhm.
had it coming at you both ways. I don't have
Yes.
to ask how you felt. What I want to ask is, have you forgiven yourself yet?
Still a work in progress. I think yes, and I think that I am trying to heal. I'm doing a lot of healing through writing.
Mhm,
One of the things that I had to face where was how did I have this African American child that, developed this very rigid, perfectionistic disease? And so, which was anorexia. And I had to think like, okay, if environment is part of this, where did this come from? And I had to look really inside of myself. I did not have an eating disorder, but I was highly and still am highly perfectionistic. So I wrote a piece on perfectionism that helped a lot with dealing with just my thoughts around that. I'm
mhm,
actively working on that with my own therapist, and trying to learn how to not be so rigid and be a little more self-compassionate. Um, and so the other thing that I'm doing also is just trying to find purpose in helping people,
mhm,
especially patients of color, because they're just, when we have our hashtag representation matters, there are, you don't tend to see a lot of African American faces being very open about their eating disorder journey. So
mhm.
I've um, I really want to make sure that I put a face, a face of
Mhm.
color to this disease because it affects all of us. And in some cases, I think I saw a stat on National Eating Disorder, NEDA, National Eating Disorders Association, that African American teens may are more at risk for a lifetime prevalence of eating disorder, but yet, will be commonly overlooked. The same symptoms and signs may not be recognized as problematic. So I'm actually writing some children's books. The first one is called Afro Puffs Held High. That one's being illustrated currently, and that is really kind of my own story, my own childhood adversity story. And then I have some other children's books that I'm working on along the mental health realm. So trying to get characters of color in illustration in a way that kids can see that they're not alone.
Oh, we're looking forward to seeing those. Those are
Mhm.
gonna help us move the discussion along. We're really looking forward to hearing those. We are at the end of our time together, and I always like to ask, if there's one thing and only one thing that someone remembers from this important conversation, what should it be?
You are not alone. You are not alone. Whatever you are feeling or thinking um, or doing in the realm of eating, there's help,
Mhm.
and there are people that are out there that can help you get past this. And so it's just making, or I guess taking the first steps to reach out for help.
Perfect. That's why we like to share the parents' perspective. We talk with a lot of experts, but we like to share the parents' perspective because that really drives in the point you are not alone. Here's another family that's experiences. If you're
Mhm.
experiencing the same, it's okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank your family for sharing their story in writing and now live on the air. We appreciate the generosity. I know that it's not easy.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
there are resources in the comment section. Please access those if you think that this is something that is happening in your family, or if you know, please access those resources. Tomorrow, we will be back at 10:30 a.m. with Jen and Sharon, Coffee with Jen and Sharon. So please join us then when they have a topic that they discuss. They're two moms and they discuss all things connected with teens. Tonight, we are continuing our Destination College series. It's a summit. It meets once a week. And tonight we are discussing, ooh, I believe we are behind the scenes with the application, but I could be wrong. Please register for the Destination College series. All registrants are eligible for our grand raffle prize. The grand raffle prize is an SAT or ACT course by Sylvan Learning. That is a $1,200 value. You don't have to do anything other than register for that. If you are just registering now and we are on week 4, don't worry. You will receive the replays of the recordings of the previous weeks, so you will not have missed them, and you can watch it at your own on your own time. And that applies to this week and the future weeks, that if you can't quite get on for the live discussion, which I encourage because then you can question our experts live, you can have access to the recordings when you register. So please, in the comment section is the registration link, and we will be on tonight with Destination College and tomorrow, Wednesday, with Coffee with Jen and Sharon. Dr. Jones, thank you again. I appreciate your story, and I appreciate all it takes for you to get up in front of us and tell it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody.